Darren Dawson didn't expect the day to go sideways until his beat-up sedan coughed twice and stalled in front of the grocery store, right in front of a woman in heels too expensive for this part of town. He turned the key again. Nothing. "Come on, don't do this to me now," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow as the sun beat down on the hood. His 6-year-old son, Theo, twisted in the back seat, a juice box in one hand and wide eyes watching his dad struggle. "We stuck again, Dad, just for a minute, buddy." Darren forced a smile. "It's just tired, like us." From the sidewalk, an elderly voice called, "Darren." He looked up to see Mrs. Hartley, his 80-year-old neighbor, clutching 2 paper bags that seemed heavier than she could manage. He jumped out of the car. "Let me help you with those," he said, jogging over. "You walking all the way home?" She nodded. "I was going to take the bus, but I didn't expect these to weigh a ton. I'll drive you." Car's being dramatic, but it'll move. He took the bags and glanced back at Theo. "Just hop in the front seat, Mrs. H." What Darren didn't notice was the woman he passed on the sidewalk, tall, sharp suit, dark sunglasses, and a phone pressed to her ear, pausing mid-step to look at him. Her heels clicked to a stop. Elena Foster had just stepped out of a meeting at the Community Outreach Center, walking back to her car when she saw him. She didn't know his name. She didn't know anything about him. Just that he had this easy way about him, the way he crouched to meet the old woman's gaze, his laugh as he opened the passenger door, how gently he buckled her seatbelt. It caught her off guard. "Miss Foster." Her assistant's voice piped through the phone. "You still there?" Elena blinked. "Yeah." "I'm here." But she wasn't. Not really. She was watching that man, his son, and the elderly woman drive away in a car that clearly needed a miracle. By the time Darren dropped off Mrs. Hartley and got Theo home, his work boots were soaked in sweat and his stomach was growling. He worked construction during the day and drove for a rideshare app at night. Ever since Theo's mom left 2 years ago, it had been just the two of them. He made peanut butter sandwiches, cut Theo's into triangles, and sat across from him. "You ever think about superheroes, Dad? All the time." "I think you're one," Theo said through a mouthful of sandwich. Darren chuckled. "Yeah, what's my superpower? You help people, even when your car's broken. That's kind of awesome." He didn't say anything. Just reached across the table and ruffled his son's hair. 2 days later, Elena saw him again. She was walking out of the same outreach center, finalizing some details for the company's charity event. Her company, Foster Global, was backing the entire renovation of the old neighborhood library. It wasn't something she did for press. In fact, she hated press. She just remembered what it was like growing up in a house where rent was always late and peanut butter sandwiches were dinner. He was across the street, loading bricks into a wheelbarrow at a construction site. Shirt damp with sweat, jeans dusty. That same little boy from the other day sitting under a tree with a worn superhero coloring book. Lena didn't even realize she was walking toward them until she was already halfway there. "Hey," she said, stopping a few feet away. Darren turned, squinting. "Hi, sorry. I saw you the other day helping that woman. I just wanted to say, that was really kind." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "Oh yeah, that's just Mrs. Hartley. She's my neighbor." "I figured." She glanced at the boy. "Your son," he smiled. "Yep, that's Theo." Theo waved. "Hi, are you a superhero too?" She laughed. "I wish. I just work a lot." "I bet you fight crime in that jacket," he said seriously. Elena glanced at her designer blazer and gave a real laugh this time. "Only corporate crime. You need something?" Darren asked, not unkindly, just cautious. "I just came to say thanks, that's all." She hesitated, then added, "I'm Elena." "Darren," he said. "Nice to meet you." She smiled, and then her driver pulled up in a sleek black SUV behind her. He raised a brow. "You from around here?" "Not exactly." Before she could say more, her assistant stuck her head out the SUV window. "Miss Foster, we're going to be late for the board meeting." Darren blinked. "Foster? As in Foster Global?" She gave a small shrug. "Yeah. That Foster." She saw the moment the wall went up behind his eyes. He nodded. "Well, nice meeting you, Elena." And just like that, he turned back to his work. Later that night, Elena couldn't stop thinking about him, about how quickly his face changed when he realized who she was. About that little boy with his superhero drawings. About the way Darren didn't try to impress her, didn't flirt, didn't act like most men did when they found out she ran a billion-dollar company. He didn't need her for anything, and that made her want to know him more. Darren tried not to think about her. He'd been around money before. Not personally, but he'd seen it. Women who wore $5,000 shoes didn't belong in his world. They didn't know what it was like to pick up extra shifts just to cover daycare. They didn't know what it was like to stretch ground beef for 4 nights. He didn't need another complication. But when Theo asked, "Is she coming back?" the next day, Darren just said, "I don't think so, bud." Theo frowned. "I liked her." "Yeah," Darren said quietly. "Me too." But Elena did come back. 3 days later, she showed up at the construction site again. No suit this time, just jeans, a t-shirt, and her hair in a ponytail. Darren wiped his brow and stared. "You lost." "Nope," she said. "I asked around. They told me the contractor here's a guy named Darren Dawson." He crossed his arms. And I brought lunch." She held up 2 brown bags. "One has roast beef, the other's turkey. Don't ask me which is which." He stared at her, then at the bags. "You brought me lunch, and Theo." He gets his own bag. Theo perked up from under the tree. "Is it peanut butter and jelly?" "Better," Elena said. "Grilled cheese with apples on the side." Theo jumped up. "She's definitely a superhero." Darren shook his head, but he couldn't help the smile tugging at his mouth. "I don't know what you're doing here," he said, "but I don't do charity." She met his eyes. "Good, neither do I." And for the first time in years, Darren felt something stir in his chest, hope. "Your son's got good taste," Elena said, watching Theo take a gigantic bite of his sandwich on the curb. "Grilled cheese and apples were my go-to when I was his age." Darren leaned against the scaffolding, arms folded across his chest. "Didn't take you for the type who ate sandwiches on sidewalks." "Neither did my father," she said, unwrapping her own meal and sitting beside Theo without waiting for permission. "Which is probably why I did it." Darren didn't respond right away. He was watching her carefully, not in the way men usually watched Elena, hungry or impressed, but like he was trying to figure out what she wanted. "I don't do interviews," he said suddenly. "I'm not writing one. Don't need a job either. I'm not offering." He finally walked over and crouched beside her, keeping his voice low. "Then why are you here again?" She looked up, eyes steady. "Because I wanted to be." He didn't know what to say to that, but Theo spoke up before the silence stretched too long. "Can we keep her?" Darren blinked. "She's not a puppy kid. You don't like her." "I didn't say that." Elena raised an eyebrow but kept her gaze on Theo. "What would we do if you kept me? You could come to the library with us on Saturday. It's getting a new roof, but the books are still open. Dad says I can pick out 3. Her eyes flicked to Darren. "You read with him every week." He nodded once. "It's our thing." "I'd like that," she said softly. That Saturday, she showed up at the library entrance 5 minutes early, not in a black SUV but walking. Sunglasses gone. A canvas bag slung over one shoulder. Theo ran to her immediately. "You came. I said I would." Darren stepped out of the building behind him, holding a stack of books under one arm. He looked surprised to see her on foot. "You walk here." Didn't seem right to pull up in something with bulletproof windows. He cracked a grin before he could stop himself. "Fair." Inside, the library was quiet, the air cool and heavy with the scent of old paper. Theo darted between shelves, already diving into a pile of superhero comics. Elena followed Darren to the far side where the adult section was nearly empty. "You actually read these?" she asked, running a finger along the spine of a book on architecture. "Some. Helps with the job. I like knowing how things work, why one beam holds and another cracks." She pulled one down and flipped it open. "I spent years pretending I knew everything about buildings. My father hated that I didn't." "What he want you to be?" Him. Darren studied her. "And what do you want to be?" She closed the book, returning it to the shelf. "Someone who doesn't have to put on armor every time she walks into a room." He leaned against the edge of the shelf. "Seems like you're doing fine without it today." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Theo returned a few minutes later with a stack of books taller than his head. "I know it's more than 3, but I couldn't decide." Darren crouched down. "We'll make it work." Elena knelt beside them. "How about I pick 3 too and we call it even?" Theo beamed. "Deal." By the time they left, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. They walked the few blocks back to Darren's apartment, Theo recounting the plot of an entire comic series without taking a breath. When they reached his building, Darren hesitated. "You want to come up? I make a mean spaghetti and we've got root beer floats. I don't want to intrude. You brought lunch, seems fair." Inside, the apartment was small but clean. A few toys were scattered on the floor. A single framed photo sat on the bookshelf. Darren and Theo, both smiling, both covered in paint. Elena wandered to the kitchen while Darren boiled the pasta. "You did all this yourself," he nodded. "Taught myself to cook after Theo's mom left." Couldn't keep feeding him frozen waffles. She reached for 2 glasses. "You're doing a damn good job," he glanced over his shoulder. "You say that like you've seen the alternative." "I have." They sat at the kitchen table, Theo between them, slurping noodles and laughing at absolutely nothing. It felt normal. A word Elena hadn't felt in years. When Theo finally nodded off on the couch, Darren tucked a blanket over him and returned to the kitchen, where she was loading dishes into the sink. "You don't have to do that. I don't mind. Most people with your kind of money don't wash dishes they didn't dirty." She didn't answer that, just rinsed a plate and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed. He didn't pull away. He dried the plate slowly, then cleared his throat. "You're not like I expected. Rich and heartless, distant. I am, most days. But something about this," she nodded toward the living room, "makes it hard to be." He hesitated. "You planning on coming around more?" "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you'll let me." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since she'd walked into his life, he didn't see the CEO. He saw a woman who looked tired of pretending. A woman who'd chosen to sit on a sidewalk and eat a sandwich with a kid she didn't know. A woman who wasn't running from anything but maybe toward something. He set the towel down, then come back. She met his gaze without flinching. "I will." And for the first time in years, she meant it. It started to rain the next Saturday, the kind of warm, steady drizzle that turned sidewalks slick and made the city hush under umbrellas. Darren stood just inside the hardware store entrance, a receipt in one hand and a coil of copper wire in the other, waiting for the weather to ease enough to jog back to his car. He didn't see Elena until her voice cut through the murmur of the checkout line behind him. "I was hoping I'd run into you." He turned, surprised. She stood in a navy trench coat, her hair damp and curling slightly at the edges, holding a bag of screws and a battered blueprint folder under her arm. "You do your own repairs now?" Darren asked, looking pointedly at the supply list she'd tucked under one elbow. "I'm helping the library team sketch out the interior layout for the new reading center. Figured I should learn what a load-bearing wall actually is." He laughed under his breath. "That's more than most developers bother with." "I'm not most developers." He stepped aside to let a couple pass. "You here alone?" "My driver dropped me off. He hates the rain." Darren raised his brows. "You walked from the corner in heels, boots," she corrected. "I'm not completely reckless." A pause hung between them, filled with the distant clatter of carts and a high-pitched beep from the register. Darren finally nodded toward the exit. "You want a ride?" She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I wouldn't offer if I wasn't." They reached his car just as the rain intensified. She climbed in, brushing a few stray drops from her coat and glancing at the back seat. "No Theo today. He's with my friend Claire. She watches him when I have errands." "She's a retired nurse, lives 2 floors up from us." Elena looked relieved. "I was wondering. I didn't think you'd leave him alone." "I wouldn't." He started the engine and turned on the heat. "Where to?" "Library." "I left my laptop in the conference room." They drove in silence for a few blocks, the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just full of unasked questions. Finally, she shifted slightly in her seat. "I used to come to that library as a kid." He glanced over. "Didn't know you grew up around here." "Not far. We moved a lot. My mom worked 2 jobs. The library was the only place that didn't ask questions as long as I was quiet and returned the books." Darren nodded slowly. "I get that. I think that's why I keep coming back to this place. Feels like I owe it something. You're rebuilding it. That's more than most people do. I'm not doing it for recognition." "I didn't say you were." Their eyes met for a moment, and something passed between them, something too heavy for words and too new to name. When they reached the library, she hesitated before opening the door. "Do you want to come in?" He considered it. Won't be long. No, just need to grab the laptop and check one thing on the renovation plan. He followed her in. The library was dim and quiet, the overhead lights off except for the ones above the front desk. Elena led him through the narrow hallway toward a side office filled with blueprints and boxes. She bent over the desk, lifting the laptop and flipping it open. Darren leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You're not what I expected either, you know. She didn't look up. What did you expect? Someone who doesn't care if the bookshelves are wood or steel, someone who signs a check and disappears. She closed the laptop and turned. I used to hide behind the third row of fiction. I remember the exact corner. It was the only place I felt invisible in a good way. Darren stepped into the room slowly. Why invisible? Because no one was expecting anything from me there. Not like at home, not like at school. I could just exist. He nodded once, understanding in his eyes. I know that feeling, her voice softened. I think that's why I noticed you that day on the street. You noticed me. You didn't look through people. You saw them. Mrs. Hartley, your kid, even me. You didn't flinch when you realized who I was. He looked away. I almost did. But you didn't. Silence again. Then, impulsively, she stepped closer, placing the laptop on the desk behind her. You keep something locked up so tight, Darren. Like you're afraid it'll break if you let it out. He met her eyes. I've been broken before. I just learned to patch it without making a sound. She didn't reach for him. She just stood still, breathing the same air, rain tapping softly at the window behind them. What if I don't want to be invisible anymore? She asked. His voice was rough. Then say what you want. I want to see where this goes. He let out a slow breath, eyes searching hers. Then come over tomorrow, I'll cook again. You can bring something store-bought and pretend you made it. She let out a short laugh. Deal. They left the library together, their shoulders brushing in the doorway as the rain finally slowed. The next afternoon, she arrived with a bouquet of tulips and a tin of lemon shortbread cookies. Theo opened the door before Darren could, nearly tripping in his socks. You're back. Told you I would be. You brought cookies, of course. Theo grabbed them and ran toward the kitchen. Dad, she brought dessert. Darren stepped aside to let her in. He's been asking about you since breakfast. Elena smiled and handed him the flowers. For you, or the kitchen, whichever needs them more. He took them, stunned for a second, then nodded toward the counter. They'll go by the sink. Brighten the place up. They cooked together, a chaotic, laughter-filled mess of pasta, salad, and spilled flour. Darren watched her move through the kitchen like she belonged, teasing Theo over his uneven carrot slices, humming under her breath when she stirred the sauce. After dinner, Theo fell asleep halfway through a movie, curled under a blanket on the couch. Elena helped Darren carry the dishes to the sink. You get a minute to breathe doing all this, sometimes, when he's asleep and the world's quiet. She handed him a plate. Do you ever think about what you'd do if things were different? He dried the plate slowly. I used to, before Theo. Now it's more about keeping the roof over our heads. I think about it too, she admitted. What I'd be if I wasn't always chasing something. He set the plate down and turned to her. And what would you be? Her answer was quiet. Happy. He reached for her hand carefully, like testing if the moment was real. She didn't pull away. Maybe we both still can be, he said. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. The gala at the new Eden Foundation was the kind of event Elena normally dreaded, cameras flashing, champagne flutes exchanged like weapons, conversation laced with veiled ambition. But this time, she wasn't walking in alone. Darren adjusted the sleeves of his tailored navy suit, the first one he'd ever worn that hadn't come off the rack at a discount outlet. Elena had insisted on getting it custom-made as a thank you for helping her with the reading center. He'd argued. She'd ignored him. And now, as he stepped out of the black car behind her, he felt like he was walking inside someone else's life. You still sure about this? He asked, watching the crush of photographers near the entrance. She looked over at him, her expression unreadable. You're not a secret, Darren. I'm not going to treat you like one. And what if they ask who I am? Then I'll tell them the truth. Her hand found his. That you're the man I'm with. Inside, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and chatter. Waiters floated through the crowd with silver trays. A jazz trio played near the grand piano. And across the room, several board members looked up the moment Elena entered. She kept his hand in hers, walking with the kind of self-assured grace that made people step back without realizing they were doing it. Darren watched her navigate the crowd, pausing only to introduce him to a few key people, never rushing, never hesitating. "This is Darren Dawson," she told a man in a crisp black tuxedo. "He's overseeing the local partnership with the library project." Darren blinked. That hadn't been something they'd ever discussed. The man extended a hand. "Ah, the contractor. Elena's told us the renovations wouldn't be happening without you." Darren shook his hand, confused. Later, when they slipped away to the quiet terrace behind the ballroom, he turned to her. "You made it sound like I'm running the whole thing." "You are. I just gave you the budget. I'm not a project manager. You are now." He stared at her. "You just decided that. I made a call. The board approved. You were already doing the work, Darren." "I just gave it a title." "You didn't think you should ask me first," she crossed her arms. "If I had, would you have said yes?" "No, exactly." He looked away, jaw tight. "You can't just decide things for me. I didn't do it to control you." "Then why?" "Because you deserve better than barely scraping by on someone else's schedule. You've been breaking your back to build something that matters, and I wanted to give you the space to do it fully." He didn't speak for a moment. Then his voice came low, steady. "You don't get to fix me, Elena. I'm not trying to fix you. It feels like you are." She stepped back, her voice softer now. "You think I don't know what it's like to feel like someone's just waiting to change you. I've lived my entire life proving I'm not my father's shadow. I'm not trying to fix you, Darren. I'm trying to stand beside you." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration flashing in his eyes, but something else too, a crack in the armor. He looked at her differently, then not as the woman who swept into his life with tailored clothes and expensive lunches, but as someone who had, quietly, been showing up every time he needed her. "I didn't grow up with people doing things for me," he said. "I'm still not used to it." She stepped closer. "Then start with this. Let me believe in you until you start believing in yourself." They didn't kiss, not yet. Instead, they stood side by side in the cool night air, the hum of the gala behind them, the city beyond. Weeks passed. The library project moved forward faster than expected. Darren's new role meant he wasn't just lifting beams and hauling tools, he was leading meetings, coordinating teams, managing timelines. Elena never hovered. She came when he asked. She listened more than she spoke. And slowly, he stopped flinching when she offered help. He still drove Theo to school every morning, still made dinner every night. But now, there were moments, quiet ones, when he'd catch himself smiling for no reason. Like when he found one of Elena's notes in his lunch bag. Or when Theo came home with a drawing of all three of them standing in front of the library, stick figures with giant smiles. "You gave me 2 watches, Darren had said, holding up the sketch. "Why?" "Because you're always on time now," Theo had said. "You're like a boss," Elena had laughed when he told her later. "You are a boss," she said. "You just didn't have the title before." They didn't have labels for what they were or what they were becoming, but it didn't matter. They had rhythm now, dinner at her place once a week. Movie nights at his. A new bookshelf in the living room that Elena assembled herself, refusing to let Darren help. One afternoon, as the final inspection wrapped at the library site, Darren stood outside the freshly painted entrance, watching the sun filter through the trees. Elena walked up beside him, her heels crunching softly on the gravel. "They're going to open the doors next Saturday," he said. "You'll be there, wouldn't miss it." He glanced at her. "You know, I never imagined my life would look like this." She tilted her head. "Better or worse?" "Better." "Way better." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He stared. "What's that?" "Relax," she said, opening it to reveal a silver compass on a chain. "It's not a ring yet," he blinked. "What, I had it engraved," she said, turning it over in her hand before passing it to him. Inside the lid in clean script were the words, "For the man who always finds his way home." He swallowed hard. "Elena, you don't owe me anything," she said quickly. "I just wanted you to have it. You've been guiding more than just this project." He closed the box and looked at her, every wall he'd built, every fear he'd clung to, falling away like dust. "I don't want to do any of this without you. It's not about whether you need me, Darren. It's about whether you want me." He stepped closer. "I do." She waited, watching him. I want you in every part of this life, he said, even the messy ones. Even when I take up the whole bed, especially then, she laughed, eyes shining. You sure? He nodded. I've been sure for weeks. So when the library opened the next Saturday, they stood together at the ribbon cutting, Theo at their side. The crowd clapped, the mayor made a speech, and the local paper snapped a photo of Elena and Darren holding the oversized scissors together. Later that night, in the quiet glow of their shared living room, Theo asleep under the new blanket Elena had picked out, Darren turned to her. You know what I realized? What? You didn't fall in love with me because I drove Mrs. Hartley home. No, she said, resting her head against his shoulder. I fell in love with you because you would have done it even if no one was watching. He kissed her then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything more. And in the stillness that followed, with the soft hum of the city beyond the window and the warmth of a life they'd built around each other, Darren Dawson finally believed he was exactly where he was meant to be. The first time Elena stood in Darren's apartment and called it home, it was because the stove had caught fire. Not because of a dramatic accident, but because Darren had tried to make lemon chicken from a recipe Theo had found in a comic book. There was too much oil, not enough attention, and one rogue flame that sent the kitchen into chaos. Elena didn't scream. She grabbed the fire extinguisher, yanked the pin with a muttered curse, and sprayed with surgical precision. After the smoke cleared and Theo opened a window wide enough to let in November air, Darren sat on the floor, staring at the charred skillet, and coughing stood out of his lungs. Elena stood next to him, covered in foam, her hair half tied and streaked with flour. I think your stove just resigned, he laughed, hoarse but genuine. I was trying to impress you. She crouched beside him, nudging his knee with hers. You already did, but maybe next time skip the comic book cuisine. Theo peered around the doorframe, holding a half-burned spatula. Can we order pizza now? That night, after the kitchen was clean and Theo was tucked in under the covers with a slice of pepperoni and a bedtime comic, Darren wrapped an arm around Elena on the couch. You should move in, he said, so simply it almost slipped past her. She blinked. Because I saved your apartment from spontaneous combustion. No, he said, fingers brushing her wrist. Because I want to wake up next to you, not wait around for the next Thursday dinner or Sunday movie. I want this. Every part of it. The mess, the noise, the burnt chicken. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand, tracing a small scar across his knuckle with her thumb. What about my world? She asked. The boardrooms, the travel, the late nights. I'm not asking you to give anything up. I'm asking to be part of it, and for you to keep being part of mine. She looked up, eyes soft but certain. Then yes. The move was quiet, not hidden, just personal. Elena didn't send a press release. There were no headlines. Just boxes filled with worn books, Theo's drawings, and a few silk blouses that now hung beside Darren's work shirts. The first night in their shared home, Theo had insisted they all sleep in the living room under a blanket fort made of couch cushions and string lights. Elena had agreed without hesitation, crawling into that makeshift tent with more joy than she'd felt in years. Winter settled in, and with it came steady routines. Shared breakfasts, school pickups, renovation updates, and kisses stolen in the laundry room when Theo wasn't looking. Elena's world didn't shrink, it expanded. Darren attended a charity gala as her date, not a guest. She sat front row at a community meeting he led about the library's new literacy programs. They weren't merging lives, they were building a new one. One evening, as the snow fell outside, Darren emerged from Theo's room after reading the last chapter of a bedtime story. Elena was seated at the dining table, glasses on, reviewing a proposal on her laptop. He leaned against the doorway. He says he wants to be a writer now. She looked up, smiling. Yesterday it was an astronaut. I told him both were fine, as long as he writes from space. She closed the laptop and stood. You know, I never thought I'd want this. He walked toward her slowly. What changed? You didn't ask me to choose between who I was and who I could be. You just made room for both. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. She froze. Before you say anything, he said, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a single oval sapphire. This isn't about fixing a broken past or making up for lost time. This is about now. About waking up every day and choosing us. Her hand trembled slightly as he took it in his. Elena Foster, he said, voice steady even as emotion lined the edges. Will you marry me? She didn't hesitate. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and she kissed him with a fierceness that left no doubt this wasn't a fairy tale. This was real. And it was theirs. The wedding was small, held 6 weeks later in the reading garden behind the library. Theo stood between them, beaming in a tiny gray suit as he handed Darren the rings. Elena wore ivory silk, her hair loose around her shoulders, and Darren's hand never left hers once during the entire ceremony. As they exchanged vows under a string of yellow lights and the soft hush of spring wind, there wasn't a single part of their journey they didn't carry with them. Every struggle, every hesitation, every quiet moment of choosing each other again and again, it all led here. When the officiant said, "You may kiss your bride," Darren didn't wait. He kissed her like it was the first and last time, and like every time in between had only been practice. After the ceremony, Theo tugged at Elena's hand. "Does this mean you're officially my stepmom now?" She crouched down, cupping his cheek. "If you're okay with that." He hugged her tightly. Best superhero ever. The reception was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and spontaneous dancing under the stars. Darren's crew from the construction site showed up in mismatched ties, and Elena's assistant cried during the first dance. At one point, Darren pulled Elena to the side, away from the music and the lights. "This isn't where I thought my life would be," he said, brushing a curl from her temple. She leaned into his touch. "Mine either. And I wouldn't change a single thing." She kissed him again, long, slow, and certain. Years later, they'd still talk about that night, about how Theo fell asleep under the cake table, about how the library lights stayed on long after the guests left, about how, in a world that never slowed down, they found a way to build something that felt like stillness, a home, a family, a forever, and they never had to be invisible again.